Now on BBC One, when a holiday to remember becomes a holiday to forget. Nick Ross is your guide for Destination Nightmare.
Every year, the British take 32 million holidays abroad.
And this is what it should be like. Time to relax. At the end of the holiday, most of our memories are good ones. Sometimes things go wrong.
Occasionally, they go terribly wrong.
Accidents on Ibiza's disco highway.
Since I've been going to Ibiza, I've been hearing about people being run over, killed, hospitalised because of that road.
Trampled by an elephant on an African safari.
My insides felt like they were bursting. I felt the bones breaking.
The Bangkok taxi ride that ended in a hail of gunfire.
Gets the gun and just shoots straight into me.
How would you cope if your destination became a nightmare?
I love the atmosphere, you don't get any attitude, you can just go out, dance, have a good time, and that's what it's all about.
Ibiza, the party island, the clubbing capital of Europe, where you dance all night and sleep it off through the day. Each year, 700,000 British youngsters flock to the island, attracted by more bars and clubs than any other holiday destination. But for too many, the party is over before it's begun. Two of Ibiza's largest and most popular clubs, Amnesia and Privilege, are here on the San Antonio Highway 731. It's the island's main road linking San Antonio in the west and Ibiza town on the south coast. Each night, up to 12,000 clubbers spill out onto the disco highway. There are no streetlights and no crossings, and it's not hard to see why it's become Europe's most notorious accident black spot. It's claimed 22 lives of young tourists in the past 2 years. Rebecca Watkins, a 19-year-old from Neath and Glamorgan, died there 3 weeks ago.
The night of that accident, I was actually DJing at Amnesia, and as we were driving out of the venue onto the main road, we saw this, big commotion, and we saw a girl lying sort of, halfway in a ditch on the side of the road. And then the next evening we were at a bar in San Antonio, and I actually asked the promoter, I said, what happened with that girl? And he said, she died. I personally was very upset about it, because people go out to Ibiza to have a good time, and all I could think of was, her family back in, in the UK. I didn't know where she was from originally. To have to sort of deal with that news,
In the same week that Rebecca Watkins died, 21-year-old student Paul Scholes from Manchester was seriously injured in a separate accident.
I gets off the coach, the mate said about 10 seconds later he heard a big screech, and he said he turned around and he just seen me flying from where the coach did, mate. I remember waking up in hospital and all my face was like swollen up. I was in a coma for 4 days. I broke all my ribs, my elbows are hurting and everything. All my legs are in pain. I was just a bit of a wreck really in hospital.
If somebody is, slightly drunk or just, in a party mood and, too relaxed, it's quite easy to kind of mow them down. You've got girls in like high heels and black dresses, you can't see people.
This bloke who just happened to come next to me, we were just chatting away and his friends went off and then he just stepped out in front of me and this car came out of nowhere because it had no headlights on and it just knocked him down and his shoes went flying everywhere and he went like crack into a bush. He was gone, he was dead and the car just drove off. All the girls were crying, it was just a shock. It was horrible, really horrible.
People have had near misses of people that were in our past holidays, that someone was actually put in a hospital because they were knocked down.
You're paying £30 to get into a club. The amount of money the club's making, we should be doing something about it.
I think that, if these British promoters are, going to do these nights in Ibiza and they're going to be doing them next year and probably for a few years to come, they ought to start thinking about, their role in making it safer rather than sort of trying to pass the buck and say, well, it's not our island.
I sincerely can say this, that I don't think the blame lies at the doors of the clubs. It lies at the doors of the politicians, and it's a problem that they need to deal with. Amnesia in particular have gone to great lengths to try and improve things, to the degree where they've even offered to pay for certain street lighting. Unfortunately, as at home, you know, there are certain, I believe, legislation which doesn't allow lighting in this area. It's similar to a conservation area at home. You know, it's 4:30 in the morning. From now until it gets light is the most dangerous time.
It's hard to imagine why this place might be considered a conservation area. The local government says it has now given the clubs permission to install proper lighting, and by the end of August the speed limit at nights will be reduced from 55 to 30 miles an hour. Roundabouts and traffic lights are being considered for next year, but some people still think responsibility lies with the clubbers themselves.
They get out drunk, and a lot of them with they have taken ecstasy. I don't realize that they are in the main road of Ibiza. So when they get out, they really don't see the cars. When they get out from the clubs, they think they are still on the clubs. They're dancing on the road. And when they hear the sound of the ambulance, they begin to dance. So you can imagine that what the problem is.
I think that the only answer to the fatalities is something that is really positive. Street lighting, traffic calming or similar. And until things like that are done, fatalities will continue, and that is a fact.
Every year, some 30,000 Britons go abroad to get married. And last year, Kevin Gator and his bride-to-be Samantha travelled over 4,000 miles for their big day. But when they got there, they found their preparations interrupted by a gatecrasher called Floyd.
Well, this is Chucky Star, alongside Sido.
Samantha and Kevin Gator work in a sweets and chocolate warehouse. Their stolen glances over the invoices gradually turned to meetings at the coffee machine and eventually to love and thoughts of marriage. They got engaged and they began to think of the wedding. But where? Which is where best mates Robbie and Suzanne Owen come in. They just returned from their honeymoon in the Bahamas and they loved it. So that was that then. Next stop, the Bahamas.
And then they said, would you come with us? And it was like, can we really go again? So we thought long and hard about it. And
we pulled the money together and we thought we'd go for it.
Didn't want to miss it.
Yeah.
And what a good choice it turned out to be, at least for the first 4 days. But with a wedding booked for the 17th of September, the party had to pull themselves away from the beach for a journey to the capital, Nassau, to organise the marriage licence. When they got there was a surprise.
It was astonishing, really, to see the place deserted. Places being boarded up, locked up and going away, everyone was. We couldn't understand what exactly was going on.
And the way the shopkeepers were talking, we realised then,
you
didn't we?
could tell the seriousness of it by the local people. You could see the bit of anxiety in the faces.
1,000 miles east in the Atlantic, a tropical storm born off the west coast of Africa was bearing down on the islands, growing in ferocity with winds at its core of 150 miles an hour, a hurricane heading straight for them.
The majority of hurricanes form well out to sea in the Atlantic, and in fact most of them will dissipate out at sea as well. Maybe up to 3 would actually make landfall during a typical season, but when they do it can be quite devastating.
And Hurricane Floyd showed every sign of making it to land. By the time they got back to their hotel, preparations were well underway, and by early evening the beach was deserted. Powerful winds were already blowing in from the ocean.
It was only about 6 p.m. on the Monday evening, and the full force of the hurricane is probably still over a day away. But at that moment, you had a job to stand up, and you could just see the sand being blown right across the complex. I don't think there was anybody outside bar the security men on the beach.
Are you collecting the glasses then?
I was excited and thrilled, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for myself to see it.
I suppose it was a bit exciting in a way, or adrenaline was running, but you just didn't envisage what was about to come.
The speed and the strength of it were just like you'd never experienced in this country. With the warmth still hitting you, with the power, was just something else.
The evening closed in. By 8 p.m. they'd retreated to their rooms and were listening to the radio. Suddenly, it didn't seem fun anymore.
It was actually the president of the Bahamas saying that he wanted everybody to evacuate, get in the home and stay there. And then it sort of sunk in, and I think I was just mouth open, eyes wide. This is it. And that for me was the point where I was scared.
Then came an order to evacuate their rooms and assemble in the ballroom.
There wasn't mass panic, but that was it then. It was like the gut feeling in your stomach, and it said, right, you go back to your bedroom, you get a couple of blankets and a pillow.
Just grabbed a few sort of little things sort of to keep with us, and off we went up into the ballroom, and as we came out, everybody else was doing exactly the same thing.
We were very fortunate that we did do it quite quickly, and we found a little bench, and unknowing to us, this little bench was going to be our living quarters for the next 3 days nearly, for sleeping, resting, eating and whatever. But there was people strewn about all over the floor.
Yeah.
Sometime during that first night that I think all power was lost.
Because you could hear the wind whistling, and then you could hear shutters being ripped off, you could hear windows going, and you could also hear sort of noises that you were thinking, what's that, what's that?
We'd be in total darkness for a couple of hours, and then it'd flicker back on. And like I say,
think the staff were trying to keep it as normal as possible, as far as they could, yeah. You know, laughing, joking, you know, serving you with your food and drink, and trying to make light-hearted entertainment out of the whole thing.
But, you just lost all track of time from that point onwards.
Getting very, very strong. It's going to get bad.
There were two things which were unusual about Hurricane Floyd. Firstly was its wind strength. As it crossed the Bahamas, the winds were in excess of, or near to 155 miles an hour, which is near to as strong as a hurricane ever gets. It was the size of the hurricane which was also significant. A typical hurricane might be 500 or 600 miles across, but this one was near 1,000 miles across.
By the next morning, the eye of the storm had passed. Winds had eased off to 100 miles an hour as Hurricane Floyd headed for the United States. Daylight brought the couple's first chance to survey the damage to their dream hotel.
It just looked like a building site because everything was in the pool. The pool was grey, the sea was murky. It was worse than Blackpool.
You can't imagine the damage that was caused. So many windows had been blown through, even the ones that had been protected by steel shutters. Large chunks of the roof had been ripped off.
Yeah.
And you just...
palm trees through windows.
You just think yourself lucky that it wasn't like part of the ballroom that was blown off, because if that had started to crack and crumble, well, we don't know what would happen then.
Somebody's room here. Full of Sandy. Oh dear.
Basically, it wasn't a holiday anymore. There was people cleaning swimming pools out, digging all the sand out, and this is like holiday of a lifetime. They're just chipping in with all the staff.
So many people wanted to go back. So many Britons just wanted to go back and didn't want to see it through, didn't they?
That's where Kev and Sam are supposed to be getting married. But...
to be honest, we just thought, this is it. After the hurricane's finished, we're going to be flown back home, that's going to be it. We didn't ever imagine that the wedding would go ahead on the Friday, but luckily we were allowed to stay, all 10 of us.
Once we were safe at the end of it, we were determined to stay and see it through, even though...
It didn't matter what it looked like, we just wanted to get married.
For we got a good thing going, a real good thing going, yeah. That girl and me. It's not about this girl and me.
So, where will they be celebrating their first wedding anniversary?
Menorca.
Yeah.
A little quieter.
Safer.
Yeah. Yeah.
I hope.
At the moment, the Atlantic is experiencing a 20-year high in hurricane activity, with 2 or 3 more hurricanes a year than is normally the case. It's to do with the changing temperature of the sea, and the peak period for hurricanes is September. So if you're thinking of taking a late break, take a brolly. Still to come on Destination Nightmare, accidents and emergencies in Hospital Costa del Sol.
So you arrive at your destination, and at the airport the question is, how do you get to the hotel? If you haven't got a transfer arranged, well, it's late, you're tired, you don't know the language all that well, you almost certainly don't know the way. The easiest thing is to get a taxi. It may cost you a bit more, but at least you'll get there in one piece.
Last February, filmmaker and experienced traveller Peter Livermore had been working in neighbouring Laos and arrived at Bangkok's international airport on its way to meet up with a friend. It was midnight, and like everyone else, he needed to get into town. Peter walked through the door to the taxi rank, where lines of yellow and green cabs wait to take customers away. But it was crowded, and he spotted a cab nearby.
To me, it just looked like a normal taxi, like all the others off to the left. Yellow, and it had a sign on the top, it had a meter inside. He stopped, opened the front door, and beckoned to me, and I got in.
The cab drove off with Peter sitting in the front seat. But almost as soon as they'd left the airport secure zone, the taxi stopped unexpectedly at a bus stop.
His excuse was that he didn't know where the address was. He wanted to pick up a friend, and this friend knew where the place was. The other guy got in the back on the right-hand side. I was a bit annoyed about this because for me he was giving a friend a free ride.
At any rate, the taxi drew off and drove through the Bangkok suburbs. But as the journey went on, the atmosphere became edgy. Peter had no idea where they were when the driver turned to him and said, quite out of the blue,
There's a gun on you. The person behind us is holding a gun onto you.
The cab turned off the main road and drove down an ill-lit, dusty track between a field and a petrol station.
I thought to myself, well, finally it's arrived, you know, I'm in this sort of situation. I kept calm. I didn't want to show any emotion or any sudden movements. The taxi driver carries on speaking. He wants money.
Peter said he had no money. He said if they let him go, he'd take it no further.
I tested the door at that stage. The taxi driver, he gets out, takes the gun from the accomplice behind, and straight away, without sort of hesitating, without waiting or questioning or anything, gets the gun and just shoots straight into me, sitting in the car.
For British diplomats here in Bangkok, Peter's shooting was doubly alarming because they'd already pieced together a sequence of events that pointed to a serial killer. Something bad was going on at Bangkok airport. Tourists had simply disappeared.
6 months before the attack on Peter, diplomatic staff from European embassies had got together for their regular monthly meeting.
Several of our nationals had been shot, and the common factor was that they'd all held taxis at Bangkok airport and hadn't been seen again.
Between August 1998 and April 1999, 6 tourists hired taxis at the airport and failed to arrive at their destinations. They were all murdered and robbed, and their bodies were dumped in shallow graves on the city perimeter.
As far as you're aware, the Thai authorities hadn't realised that all these 6 killings had been linked.
That's right. The Thais didn't appear to know what was going on.
6 tourists murdered in 8 months. Either the police didn't know what was going on, or they were keeping it a secret. Whichever, diplomats started leaking the news to Bangkok journalists.
And how come it hadn't got into the papers up to that point?
Well, no, the Thai police obviously didn't want any publicity on it. In fact, they claimed they didn't want publicity because they were making ongoing inquiries. But having said that, had there been some publicity on it, it would have been quite damaging for Thailand. You know, for people to know that tourists arriving in the country were in danger. were in danger as soon as they had arrived.
I mean, not to put too fine a point in it, your suspicion is they were keeping this quiet deliberately.
Oh, I think that's not only my suspicion, but that's the suspicion of the embassies too.
Whatever the reason, the police now stepped up their investigation, and within weeks they arrested an Egyptian tour guide and charged him with all 6 murders. He's still under arrest and awaiting trial.
At long last, the terrifying problem at the airport seemed to be resolved, and the tourist authorities were mightily relieved. But then, Peter Livermore arrived.
His attack was different in one important detail. He survived it. Incredibly, with 2 bullets in his chest, Peter scrambled out of the car and made off down the road. As he ran, he was hit by a 3rd bullet in the arm. He staggered into a petrol station, and his attackers melted into the night. With 3 bullet wounds, he was bleeding heavily. But there was a hospital just down the road, and within minutes, he was undergoing emergency surgery.
So there's a lot of concern show which really touched me. I was really touched by how good they were. You know, they were so ashamed that this is happening in their country, that had been injured.
Peter, as the first survivor of the airport attacks, was headline news. He even attracted a visit from the Minister of Tourism. This time, the authorities were determined to avoid any accusations of complacency. Leading the investigation was Police Superintendent Witaya. Peter, still recovering from his wounds and now accompanied by the police and TV cameras, came back to the airport to help with the investigation. Within 5 days, the car had been recovered, and soon after, police arrested 2 men who are now awaiting trial. Neither man had a license permitting them to pick up passengers from the airport. And it seems that the taxi had been borrowed.
As for security at the airport, it hardly comes into it, because if you look at it at the end of the day, anybody in Bangkok can rent a taxi. And most taxis in Bangkok are rented by the day. So you don't know who's going to be driving you.
The Thais claim that they've tightened up airport security, installed CCTV cameras, and improved the system for getting a licensed taxi from the regulated ticket booths. But privately, Bangkok police told us corruption at the airport remains a problem, and unlicensed taxis still sometimes get through.
If you're coming to Thailand, you can get a limousine at the airport, or you can get a taxi. But if you're getting a taxi, get a chit in advance from the air terminal. They're not very expensive. You get a metered taxi like this one. You can't haggle the price down, but at least you know what you're in for.
Back home, Peter can reflect on the journey that was nearly his last.
These are 2 of the x-rays that they did in hospital just after I came in. So the bullets are still in. And on this one you can see, well, this is the first bullet, one that broke the rib and went into the side of the lung. And then the second one that entered in behind the shoulder, crossed right over the body to the front side and came to lie on top of the heart over here. Well, it's quite impressive to realise that that was actually inside me, I suppose. So that's... You really realise how lucky you are, how it's so close to actually being definitive, you know.
Later, the Alpine adventure that went disastrously wrong.
There is no way Geoffrey would have gone down that canyon.
If there's one thing worse than getting ill, it's getting ill on holiday.
The hospital Costa del Sol in southern Spain is used to dealing with the medical problems of holidaymakers. During the high season, the Accident and Emergency Unit has 9 doctors and 9 nurses on duty who deal with around 300 patients every day. Roy McIntosh from Poole in Dorset has been on holiday for less than 24 hours before he needs to see a doctor.
In the night I moved and my back sort of just went and I couldn't move at all. It was so painful just to move an inch, and it took me about an hour to get out of bed this morning. I can't lay down at all, and it worries me what's going to happen tonight.
The doctor requests some x-rays. In the high season, 40% of patients are holiday makers, so the hospital has a team of volunteer interpreters.
We interpret between the medical staff, the administrative staff and the families. When he lifts your leg, does it hurt? All right, can you see if you can get up?
Yeah. Difícil, ¿no? No, I hold that? No?
Sí. Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay.
No?
Okay.
The hospital, with 200 beds, is the largest on the Costa del Sol and handles emergencies from up to 80 miles away. In another cubicle, Jean Heaney has just been examined.
It happened in the market in Fuengirola this morning, and I was shopping for fruit and vegetables, and unfortunately there was quite a high curb, which I didn't see. I was busy looking at the fruit and vegetables, and one minute I was vertical and the next minute I was horizontal.
She's not the only Briton with a foot injury.
In the evening I was swimming and I went to get out of the pool, and as I put my foot up it slipped back down, and where the steps join the pool there's just like metal. I just slipped my foot open and that.
While Nikki's father Philip watches, her cut is cleaned and stitched up.
Okay.
Once Nikki's been treated, there's the paperwork to deal with. And her father settles the bill for £50.
12,000.
Britons are entitled to free or reduced cost treatment in all EU countries if they have Form E111. It's available from post offices, but it's not a full substitute for holiday insurance. Roy McIntosh's x-rays have arrived and Marion explains the treatment.
Anti-relaxant, muscle relaxants to help with pain.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, great.
Roy is given an anti-inflammatory injection to ease his osteoarthritis.
That's it. Don't have this in, for God's sake.
In our second visit to the hospital, we find out if Debbie Topham's moped accident has left her with a broken arm. Last year in Switzerland, there was an accident so appalling, so shocking, that people are still asking how was it allowed to happen. On the 27th of July, in a few terrifying minutes, 21 young people lost their lives. If you think of Switzerland as a land of great natural beauty, cascading waterfalls, flower-filled meadows, enchanting lakeside hotels, and, well, let's face it, slightly dull, then you haven't been to Interlaken lately. It's become a magnet for backpackers seeking high adrenaline, high octane pursuits, like paragliding, whitewater rafting, and canyoning. There are plenty of companies offering an afternoon's adventure. And it's not just for the young and the very fit. You take your choice, pay your money, and buy your thrills. For Geoffrey Havard from Northamptonshire, Interlaken was just another stop on a 10-year journey around the world. A driver by trade, a real adventurer who'd been featured on a TV documentary driving across Africa.
Geoffrey was a great outdoors person. I mean, he spent his life outdoors from a little tot, climbing mountains. The Lake District he just knew like the back of his hand. He went on to do a lot of travelling in Africa. That was his favourite country. He loved Africa.
So it shouldn't be too much of a panic. But the problem is the slope. It's sloping too high. Okay, we're off.
When he got this job in Switzerland, which was taking youngsters around Europe, we were just so pleased because as far as we were concerned, he'd got a safe job.
In July 1999, he was working as a driver for a group of mainly Australian and New Zealand travellers on a continental tour. In Interlaken, they were offered the chance to go canyoning in a nearby gorge. It was organised by an Interlaken company called Adventure World. At £35 a head, most of the group signed up. Canyoning is a fairly new sport in which you jump, swim and slither down the course of a mountain stream. You abseil down waterfalls, wade through splash pools and shoot the rapids without the protection of a boat. It's exhilarating and challenging stuff. And the Saxton Gorge was just right for beginners. But on a late July day, the weather was changeable. Thunderstorms were forecast, and another company scheduled to use the canyon, Alpine Raft, were taking the warnings seriously.
We always watch the weather, and we cancelled already on the afternoon for the evening because there was thunderstorm coming, and there's one rule on canyoning: never ever go in on a thunderstorm.
That's a fundamental rule for you, is it?
Yes.
If there's a thunderstorm, no canyoning?
Yes.
Why did other groups go ahead then?
I don't know. You would need to ask the other company.
Of which more later. The other company, Adventure World, went up to the start of the gorge, and at 5:20, their parked vans were spotted by Martin Seematter, a local government official who was driving home from work. He was so concerned that he stopped to warn the guides. When a thunderstorm hits the upper valley, a flash flood can follow in the Saxton Gorge. The guides listened politely, but the trip went on.
If Geoffrey had have heard what the local expert had have said, there is no way Geoffrey would have gone down that canyon.
This is where they started. They get kitted up with a helmet and buoyancy jacket, wetsuit and climbing gear. They got given a safety talk, what to do, what not to do, and then they entered the canyon.
By 5:30 that afternoon, there were 53 people in the gorge in 4 different groups along the 400-metre course. There were about a dozen in each group, and each group had 2 guides.
The first 100 yards are a fairly easy slither through the water and then a walk up onto this promontory. But this rock is the point of no return. Once you abseil down, there's no way out except the other end of the canyon. By the time they got here, it was raining hard, but despite that, despite the black sky higher up the valley, despite the thunderstorm and despite the warning, the guides led them on into the ravine. Well, you've come here for adventure, and imagine the sense of achievement. You've abseiled right down to the bottom there, 50 feet or so, you're standing in a torrent. But upstream, the rainwater has gathered into a flood, it's been channeled into the ravine, and it's now bearing down towards this spot as a wall of water 6 feet high, 2 meters, bearing with it boulders, timber and rock. And down there, you've nowhere to hide.
The first group saw it coming. The 2 middle groups were caught in the ravine. A rescue mission was launched 20 minutes later when horrified villagers noticed bodies being washed along the river and into Lake Brienz. The usually crystal clear water had turned into a churning, muddy brown, awash with debris. When at last the waters subsided, the death toll was 21. 18 holidaymakers, including Geoffrey Havard, and 3 of their guides. Despite extensive searches, one body has never been found. The disaster was investigated by Juerg Noth, chief of the Bern police.
How often do you get a flash flood in this gorge?
Okay, in the last years, it happened quite a few times. This phenomenon is well known here by natives. We call it the wave.
So it's so well known, it's so frequent, it's got its own name?
Yeah, because it's caused by thunderstorms, we know it.
They know it so well that the town built this concrete barrier to prevent the wave washing dangerous debris from the Saxton Gorge down into the river below.
Adventure World have always maintained that they were blameless, that the surge of water couldn't have been predicted, that their guides were extremely well trained, and indeed one of their guides at least acted heroically, saving 2 people before she herself was swept away to her death. They promised us an interview. They said they'd take us up to the gorge to show us their safety procedures, but now we've arrived at their offices. There's nobody here. We do, though, have a copy of the official police report. It's not been made public, but we've managed to get hold of one. And that tells a very, very different story from the one that the company has maintained.
It describes the policy of Adventure World's management to leave the decision to abandon the trip to guides in the field as incomprehensible and totally illogical. It says the guides were insufficiently trained in weather forecasting, and this lack should have been obvious to the 3 members of management. It concludes that with a more responsible attitude, it would have been possible at Adventure World to realise the eventuality of such an accident.
You can't help thinking that there would be an awful lot of money had to have been refunded if the trip had been cancelled. They took the risk and went ahead. The result of the risk was just catastrophic for 21 young people.
The prosecutor will decide if we'll put the case to the court or not.
And if they decide that there is a case for prosecution, what will the people be charged with?
The charge will be homicide by negligence. We'll see.
As is so often the case, it takes tragedy to make the authorities examine safety standards. Even in Switzerland, a country that's a byword for orderliness. Until this summer, there was no organised national training scheme for canyoning companies or for their guides.
The good organisations had always trainings for their guides, but some organisations, I would say, didn't do a lot of training. So there were some young people without any official training or without any good experience.
Now all guides will be examined over 2 days in rescue techniques, reading the current, rope work and climbing.
When you take part in hazardous pursuits on holiday, you simply have to trust the company you're going with. But how do you know who to trust? Adventure World had been around for several years. It was quite a sizable business. Perhaps things will be better if, as the police report suggests, companies like it were properly regulated and inspected. But at the end of the day, hazardous pursuits will always contain an element of hazard.
Of course, that's part of the thrill.
The feeling you have in those gorges, it's just so impressive. You want to find out what's behind the next stone, how we get over that stone. All that makes it so fun and give the touch of real life.
There are more details about canyoning on the Destination Nightmare website. That's www.bbc.co.uk/destination. And bear in mind, if you do something adventurous like canyoning or even paragliding from the beach, it may not be covered by your standard holiday insurance. As for what happened to Adventure World,
the company continued to offer adventure activities like whitewater rafting and bungee jumping, which took place from the Schilthorn cable car. They offered 2 jumps, one from 180 metres, one from 100 metres. But on the 13th of May this year, an Adventure World guide attached the wrong rope to the foot of an American. He should have used a green rope like this one for the 100-metre fall. Instead, he used a red one, which was longer than the drop. The American jumped straight to his death onto the car park beneath him. Adventure World has now ceased trading, and a second criminal investigation is underway.
now back to the hospital, Costa del Sol.
It's evening at the hospital, and Tim Hossack and his mother Jan have arrived after a little domestic accident.
He fancied some baked beans and the new tins that you pull open that don't cut, it's cut. He's nearly cut his finger off. Oh, I'm still shaking. Because you don't know what to do, you don't know where to go. Unfortunately, there's millions of English down here. Are you on holiday? Oh.
Debbie Topham has been sent on from another clinic with x-rays of a suspected broken arm after her moped crash. First up for Tim is an interview with Nurse Martina. The cut needs to be cleaned and disinfected before he's taken for stitching.
All right, if you'd like to come with us.
Right.
Debbie Topham's moped fall was 3 days ago.
¿Hablas español? ¿Español? No? Tienen que ayudar otra vez.
Debbie, I'm Marion. I'm going to translate for you. Okay.
No, I've been drunk, so it's not hurt. I just stayed drunk. It hurt yesterday. It started hurting yesterday and they sent me home from last night.
¿Dónde te duele?
Oh,
Where does it hurt exactly, Debbie? Can you show
all
him?
over.
All over en todo sitio.
¿Ahí duele?
Yes,
Sí.
Ay, ya.
Bien. Pero dile que vamos a repetir la radiografía para estar más seguros, ¿eh?
All right, they'd like to do the X-ray again just to be sure. All right? Yeah?
Vale. Pues...
Tim Hossack's finger needs stitching and he needs a tetanus injection.
You turn your hand like that here, okay? So that thing is going to get abierto.
It's now at the bottom but not at the top.
It will.
What happened to the tetanus?
Okay, that's it.
Oh, when we were coming just past this place, and then I got a phone call to say, "Quick, Mum, I've chopped my finger off." Done.
Doesn't hurt at all. It's good.
Debbie's new x-rays have arrived.
The doctor said is that it doesn't look like it's broken, so it's inflamed.
But the arm still needs to be immobilised in plaster.
Pain?
Oh. It's swollen, so stop your head.
Frente uno momento ahí. Eso. Esto para...
Oh my God.
Finished?
Yes.
That was nothing.
I'm so proud.
Debbie's moped riding days are behind her, for this trip at any rate. And Tim Hossack is off to do battle with another tin of baked beans. When you pay £100 a day for a hotel room, you expect a decent view and a bit of peace and quiet. And it takes something special to get John and Edna Salter to leave their home in Paynton, Devon. Something special like a fortnight in the Seychelles.
We thought it would be very beautiful, nice warm sea and sunny beaches, didn't we? Not too crowded.
What they wanted from their local travel agent going places was a good Seychelles hotel, somewhere to unwind.
They showed us in the brochure and it was right on the beach. And what more could you ask for? This was just what we wanted, really.
The hotel was featured in the brochure of Airwaves World. There was a warning. A new wing is being added. All work is scheduled to be completed by November '98. Well, that's okay. They weren't going until March '99.
They assured us that everything was okay and would be under control or finished by the time we got there.
After they'd made their booking, the Salters received an amended invoice which stated building works continuing until June 1999, right through their holiday. They wrote to the hotel, which reassured them disturbances would be kept to a minimum level, and Airwaves told them they could cancel with a refund of their deposit, but confirmed inconvenience at the hotel was absolutely minimal.
So we decided, well, we'd go and see what it was like, and of course it was absolutely a disaster. If we'd only known this, or somebody had said it's not really ready, there's no point in going, we wouldn't have gone.
We got there about 6:30, didn't we? 7 o'clock in the evening, and we could hear the building work going as we walked in, so, you know, that was a warning.
What the hotel had described as minimum disturbance turned out to be a full-scale refurbishment. Work continued from dawn to dusk throughout their 10-night stay.
Drilling holes.
Or taking walls down
ceilings,
or whatever.
You name it, everything.
They were using a cutting disc. There was no windows in the openings upstairs, but there was dust or whatever was streaming out.
That was even worse than I imagined.
And there's not much you can do once you were there. Put up with it for a fortnight.
There were cranes delivering breeze blocks and timber over the top of the hotel.
And there would be hammering going on for about an hour and a half.
They had all their cement bags and materials cluttering all the stairways and exits, didn't they?
Yeah.
We had to sort of climb around all that to get up the 4 flights of stairs to our room.
Since returning home, the Salters have been involved in lengthy correspondence with Airwaves World. The question is simply, why was the so-called minimal disturbance actually a full-scale building site?
They shouldn't have sent us there anyway. By the time we got back home, we were completely exhausted. We just didn't really unwind at all.
Airwaves World say the state of the hotel was nothing to do with them. We do not control the day-to-day management of hotels. And the Salters were aware of the extent of the building work but chose to continue with their holiday. The company claims to have offered the Salters a full refund before they set off, though the Salters say they were only offered their deposit back. The whole matter will now be settled in court. As for the Coral Strand Hotel, it's told us all building work is now over.
If the hotel had finished, there was no building work and it had been completed, I think it would have been a very good hotel. It was actually good to get home. We went there purely to relax and unwind, but it seemed to go the other way around. We wound ourselves up. Well, they wound us up.
If your dream hotel turned out something like this, look at the Destination Nightmare website and we'll show you how to complain effectively. But meanwhile, it's worth remembering if you paid for your holiday on a credit card, then you may have a claim against the credit card company. For most of us, a little straightforward camera like this is good enough for those holiday snaps. But for those who've really got the photography bug, taking pictures becomes one of the main reasons for the holiday, which is why Stephen and Margaret Street went on safari in Botswana.
What we have here is the camera I had around my neck at the time of the attack of the elephant. It's quite a good camera, but despite that, it obviously couldn't take the impact when a 3-ton elephant decides it doesn't like you.
Stephen's a Church of England lay preacher in Middlesbrough. Last year, he and his wife Margaret decided to get close to nature in southern Africa.
There's an environment there which is very unique, and it's a wonderful experience to see. And so we went there to experience that, but also I really wanted to try and get some photographs.
For the first week, they were based among the reeds of the Okavango Delta. 6,000 square miles of marshy river basin, home to elephants, lions, cheetahs, and over 500 different species of birds.
At the point when we left that delta area, it was the best holiday I've ever had in my life. Absolutely superb.
Just to experience that environment is wonderful. It's so peaceful. You feel like you're 1,000 miles from the 21st century.
They moved from the Delta for a walking or mobile safari. According to the experts, it's the ultimate African experience.
Mobile safaris are wonderful. The safari on foot, you can't beat it. It's the only way to really see Africa.
Because there's nothing between you and the animals, the senses of being there is really heightened. Because you know that really you're in that environment.
I mean, there is potential, obviously, for problems and danger, but that just gives it that edge, I think.
Exhilarated, they reached their campsite in early afternoon. They took a siesta from the heat of the day and then in the evening cool set out again for a 2-hour walk.
And we sat on this little knoll looking over the floodplain in the late evening, and we were just watching the plains animals, and it was a really magical moment. It was a classic sort of African scene.
after which a stroll back to camp.
And as we were walking, we just heard this crashing in the trees, and we all turned to look at this crashing, and the lead elephant just took one look at us and came at us.
There was no warning, no sort of mock charge, no displaying suggesting that she was unhappy with us being there. She just looked up, saw us and went.
An elephant will attack you because it's suddenly startled, because it's defending a calf, and because you're approaching too closely and you haven't taken a warning. Most occasions, elephants will warn you, but if it's a surprise, then they're left with no option.
I was really concerned that it was going to hit Margaret, and so I moved away, hoping it would sort of focus on me, really, and not on Margaret, which it seemed to do.
I just stood there. My reaction to terror was just paralysis.
The elephant caught me up very quickly indeed, and it hit me, and I don't know what it hit me with, but it felt as if it was giving me a slap with its trunk, and I staggered a little bit, but I kept my footing and I kept running, and then it hit me a second time, and the second time it hit me, I lost my footing, and I sort of fell to the floor, and then while I was lying on the floor, it hit me a third time, and the third time it hit me, it actually pushed me right into the floor. And at that point, when it hit me and pushed me into the floor, I felt, you know, my insides felt like they were bursting. I felt the bones breaking. And I'm lying on the floor, and all I could hear was Margaret calling my name.
I went to him, and from the way he spoke, he obviously thought that he would die there and then.
I was telling Margaret I loved her. I thought it was maybe the last thing I'd be able to say to her.
6 broken ribs, both shoulder blades broken, and 9 days in a coma. Stephen was flown to the capital for treatment, and Margaret was at her lowest ebb.
He looked completely lifeless, just had machines doing everything. And I looked at him and I thought, you know, 5,000 miles from home, in a strange city, I'm completely alone.
Margaret rang me up on the Saturday night, telling me in tears that things had gone from bad to worse. And she said the staff had said, prepare to be a widow. And she was greatly distressed.
Alan had to tell the congregation about what had happened to their preacher, Stephen.
Well, they were devastated to start with. I mean, it's not often you hear such a traumatic story. And yet there was a great desire to come together to pray.
Like 2 days after that prayer meeting, I was off the ventilator. 2 days after that, I was out of intensive care, and 2 days after that, I was out of the hospital.
You know what? Despite all these destination nightmares, every one of the people we've heard from is now planning to travel again. And you can see why.
So much that we wanted to do and see, and we just never had the chance.
I wish to come back more frequently than ever, in fact, to get to know them better and to maybe work in Thailand.
We're off to the Spanish Pyrenees on a snow guides tour, wildlife holiday, looking at butterflies and flowers and birds, which are all very small and very harmless.
Bahamas. Definitely the same place.